The university hall was silent except for the low, self-important murmur of the crowd and the clinking of champagne glasses. My daughter-in-law, Lynn, moved through the space as if she owned it, her voice sharp and loud as she pointed out features of the grand building to my son, Min. "Mai will go here one day," she announced, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "She is destined for greatness, unlike some people." Her eyes flickered toward me for a fraction of a second. I stood near the entrance, dressed in my plainest clothes, invisible just as she liked me. For 10 years, that's all I had been to her. The embarrassing, silent mother-in-law, the old street sweeper. Min looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. He never defended me. He just endured, his face a constant mask of quiet shame. Lynn, however, was in her element. She loved the performance of wealth and prestige. She led my son and granddaughter toward a long but polished wall adorned with portraits. The wall of distinguished benefactors, a bronze plaque read. She scanned the faces, nodding approvingly at the serious-looking men and women in academic robes and expensive suits. "These are the people who matter, Mai," she said to her daughter. "People who build things, not people who sweep up trash." Then her eyes landed on a portrait near the center. Her posture stiffened. She took a step closer, her head tilted. The smile vanished from her face, replaced by a slack-jawed confusion. She squinted, then her eyes widened in dawning horror. Min and Mai, noticing her strange behavior, walked over to see what had captured her attention. In the photograph was a woman in her late 30s, her expression confident and serene, wearing the deep blue robes of a university professor. Underneath the portrait, an engraved brass plate gleamed under the gallery lights. It read, "Professor Tran An Thuy, co-founder of the An and Toy Research Institute." Lynn stared at the photo of the young, brilliant academic. Then she turned and stared at me, the old woman in worn-out shoes standing by the door. The two images refused to connect in her mind, but the truth was undeniable. The woman she had mocked for years, the filthy street sweeper she refused to let touch her own grandchild, was the very person whose name was engraved on the plaque as the university's largest single benefactor. You might be wondering why a distinguished professor would spend 20 years of her life sweeping the dirt from city streets. The answer begins with a broken promise, a dying wish, and a sacrifice my own son never knew I made for him. To understand, we have to go back 22 years. My life then was a world away from the cracked pavement and early morning chill of a street sweeper's route. My husband, Anne, and I were partners in everything, in life, in love, and in our work. We were both physicists at the top of our field, working on theoretical research that we believed could one day change the world of telecommunications. Our days were filled with complex equations, academic debates, and the hum of servers in our small lab. Our nights were filled with dreams of the future, a future that included our bright young son, Min. We didn't have much money, but we had a wealth of intellectual capital and a beautiful shared passion. Our home was filled with books, not expensive furniture. The air smelled of old paper and hot coffee. Min grew up watching us scribble formulas on a large whiteboard in our living room, listening to us argue passionately about quantum mechanics. He was a happy child, surrounded by love and intellectual curiosity. We were on the verge of a breakthrough, a series of patents that would be the culmination of a decade of work. It was our legacy, the foundation upon which we would build our family's future and Min's education. Then the world tilted on its axis. It started with a cough and couldn't shake. Then came the fatigue, the weight loss. The diagnosis was swift and brutal, an aggressive, late-stage cancer. The doctors, with grim faces, gave him a year at most. The world of equations and theories dissolved, replaced by a harsh reality of hospital visits, chemotherapy, and mounting medical bills. Our savings, meticulously gathered for Min's university fund, evaporated in a matter of months. We were forced to sell our lab equipment piece by piece just to keep up with the treatments. On a cold, rain-swept evening, holding my hand from his hospital bed, Anne made me promise him 2 things. His voice was a thin whisper, but his eyes were filled with a desperate fire. "Tui," he said, "never let our work fall into the wrong hands. Don't sell it. It's ours. It's our legacy." I nodded, tears streaming down my face. "And the second promise," he continued, his grip tightening on my hand, "is for Min. Give him everything. Don't let this ruin his life. Make sure he has the best education, the best opportunities. Promise me he will never have to struggle as we did." I promised. It was the last meaningful conversation we ever had, and passed away less than a month later, leaving behind a silence in our home that was heavier than any grief I had ever known. I was left with a 7-year-old son, a heart shattered into 1,000,000 pieces, and a mountain of debt that felt insurmountable. The hospital bills alone were enough to bankrupt a small company. My professor's salary, which once seemed respectable, was a mere drop in the ocean against the financial tsunami that had hit us. I looked at our patents, the folders filled with our life's work, and felt the weight of my promise to Anne. I could not sell them. They were our legacy, but a legacy doesn't put food on the table or pay for a child's schooling. I knew I couldn't continue my academic career, the research, the publishing, the university politics. It demanded a level of focus I no longer had. More importantly, it demanded hours that would keep me away from Min. He had just lost his father. He couldn't lose his mother to a demanding job as well. I needed something that would allow me to be there when he left for school and when he returned. I needed a job that was anonymous, a ghost work that paid in cash and asked no questions. The first sacrifice was the house. I sold the home where Anne and I had built our life, the one with the whiteboard in the living room and the garden where Min learned to walk. Each box I packed felt like I was sealing away a part of my soul. We moved into a tiny, 1-bedroom apartment in a rundown part of the city. The walls were thin, the plumbing was unreliable, and the neighborhood smelled of poverty and despair. I told Min it was a temporary adventure, a story he could one day tell his own children. He was young enough to believe me. One morning, while reading the classifieds in a cheap newspaper, I saw it. The city council was hiring sanitation workers, specifically street sweepers. The shift started at 4 in the morning and ended by 10. The pay was low, but it was steady. It was physically demanding, but it left my afternoons and evenings free for Min. It was perfect. It was the most humiliating, soul-crushing option available, and for that reason, I knew it was the right one. No one from my old life would ever see me. I could disappear. Professor Tran An Tui could die with her husband, and a simple, uneducated cleaning woman could take her place. And so, my new life began. Before the sun rose, I would put on my drab uniform and heavy boots. I would take my broom and cart and walk the empty, silent streets, sweeping away the debris of other people's lives. The work was grueling. My hands, once accustomed to the delicate work of calibrating lab equipment, became rough and calloused. My back ached constantly. But every time I felt like giving up, I would picture Min's face, and I would whisper Anne's promise into the cold morning air. This was for them. Every cent I earned was meticulously divided. A portion went to the debt, a portion went to our meagre living expenses, and the largest portion went into a secret savings account for Min's future. For 20 years, this was my reality. I was a ghost, haunting the city streets, fueled by nothing but a promise. Years passed in a blur of pre-dawn darkness and afternoon homework sessions. I paid off Anne's debts, coin by painful coin. My secret savings account for Min grew steadily. As I had vowed, he wanted for nothing. He had the best books, private tutors for subjects he struggled with, and a spot at the most prestigious high school in the city. He was brilliant, just like his father, and I swelled with a fierce secret pride every time he brought home a stellar report card. My sacrifice was working. My son was on the path to a great life. But as Min grew into a teenager, a subtle distance began to grow between us. He became aware of the world, of status and appearances. His friends' parents were doctors, architects, and business owners. They lived in large houses and drove nice cars. His mother left the house in the dark and came home smelling of dust and disinfectant. He stopped inviting friends over to our tiny apartment. When asked about my job, he would mumble something vague about me working for the city. I saw the shame in his eyes, a shadow that pained me more than my aching back or calloused hands. I told myself it was a normal part of growing up. I told myself that once he was successful, none of it would matter. Then he went to the university, the one Anne and I had dreamed of him attending, paid for in full by 20 years of my sweeping. There he met Lynn. When he first told me about her, his voice was full of excitement. She was beautiful, he said, smart and ambitious. Her family had a successful textile business. They were respected. When he finally brought her home to meet me, I cleaned our little apartment for 3 days straight. I bought new cushion covers and a small orchid, hoping to make the place look more presentable. The moment Lynn stepped through the door, I knew. She didn't have to say a word. Her eyes, sharp and critical, swept over our small living room, taking in the worn-out sofa, the peeling paint on the window frame, the general air of poverty. She looked at me, at my simple clothes and my hands that could never quite scrub away the ingrained dirt, and a faint, almost imperceptible sneer touched her lips. She was polite on the surface, her words as smooth and cold as river stones. But her disdain was a physical presence in the room. Later that week, Min came to visit alone. He looked troubled. "Lynn was asking about what you do," he said, avoiding my gaze. "I told her you work in sanitation." He paused, then the words tumbled out, laced with an apology he didn't have the courage to fully voice. "She said she was surprised. She asked if you were a street sweeper." The way he said it, I knew it wasn't a simple question. It was an accusation. That was the day my title changed. I was no longer Mom. In the world Min was building with Lynn, I was becoming the old street sweeper. And my son, the boy for whom I had given up everything, stood by and let it happen. Their wedding was a grand affair, far beyond their means, held at a hotel I knew I could never afford to enter on my own. Lynn wanted to make a statement to her family and friends, to show them that she was marrying a man with prospects. To fund this performance, Min came to me. He hemmed and hawed, his eyes fixed on the floor, before finally asking for the money. He knew I had savings, but he had no idea that those savings were the crystallized form of 20 years of lonely, aching work. Bound by my promise to Anne, I gave it to him. I drained the last of the funds I had painstakingly kept separate from his university trust, the money I had hoped would give me a sliver of security in my old age. At the wedding, I was a ghost. Lynn's parents, smug and prosperous, gave me a curt nod and spoke to me no further. I was seated at a table in the back, near the kitchen doors, with distant cousins and business acquaintances who had been invited out of obligation. I watched my son, my beautiful boy, toast his new bride, and I felt an icy wall descend between us. He was on one side, in a world of champagne and laughter, and I was on the other, an embarrassing secret they had to tolerate for one evening. A year later, Lynn gave birth to my granddaughter, Mai. When I heard the news, a foolish, desperate hope bloomed in my chest. A baby, I thought, would change everything. A grandchild would soften Lynn's heart. I would be a grandmother, and all the past hurts would melt away. I rushed to the hospital, my heart soaring. I had spent a month knitting a soft, delicate baby sweater, pouring all my love into every stitch. I found them in a private room, Lynn looking radiant and Min looking proud. "Congratulations," I said, my voice thick with emotion. I held out the small, carefully wrapped gift. Lynn didn't even look at it. She glanced at my hands and then back at the baby in her arms. "Don't get too close," she said, her voice light but sharp. "Your clothes, the dust. We have to be careful with the baby's immune system." I froze, my hands hovering in the air. I couldn't hold my own grandchild. Min just stood there, his face tightening, but he said nothing. He simply watched as his wife barred me from touching my own blood. A week later, I visited them at their new apartment, the deposit for which had also come from my savings. I brought another gift, a simple toy. As Lynn took it from me, she said, "Thank you, but please, don't bring any more handmade things. My is sensitive." Later, as I was leaving, I had to walk past the building's large trash bins. Lying on top of a pile of garbage, stained with coffee grounds, was the baby sweater I had knitted. It wasn't just a sweater. It was my hope, my love, my last illusion that my sacrifice had meant anything. Staring at that discarded piece of my heart, I felt something inside me break. The love and patience I had nurtured for 2 decades finally withered and died, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. My son was lost, and my kindness was seen only as weakness. For a few days, I was numb. I went to work, I swept the streets, I came home. But the fog of grief had been replaced by a chilling sense of purpose. The image of that little sweater in the trash was burned into my mind. It was a symbol of everything I had gotten wrong. I had honoured my promise to Anne to provide for Min, but I had failed in my promise to protect our legacy. My silence, which I had intended as a shield to protect my son from shame, had instead become a cage for myself. It had taught him that I was worthless and that my love could be thrown away like garbage. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in 2 decades. I climbed onto a rickety stool and pulled down a dusty, sealed box from the top of my wardrobe. Inside, beneath yellowed photographs of Anne and me in our old lab, were the patent files. My hands trembled as I lifted them out. The paper felt foreign, a relic from another life. I spread the documents across my small kitchen table, and as I read the familiar equations and technical drawings, the woman I used to be began to stir. Professor Tran Anh Thuy wasn't dead. She had just been dormant. Our research was in advanced signal processing. 20 years ago, it was purely theoretical, too complex and data-intensive for the technology of the time. But I had kept up with the world through library journals and public Wi-Fi on an old smartphone. I knew that the new 6G networks and the burgeoning field of artificial intelligence were hitting a wall, a bottleneck that our precise algorithms could unlock. Our work was no longer just a theory, it was the key. My promise to Anne was that I would not sell our legacy. He never said I couldn't build it, I needed help. I remembered an old university colleague, Bao, a brilliant mind who had left academia for the more lucrative world of intellectual property law. He had been a friend to both me and Anne. Finding him was surprisingly easy. His prestigious law firm had a website with his photo and contact information. He looked older, more serious, but his eyes were the same. From a payphone down the street, my heart pounding against my ribs, I made the call. I gave my name, my real name, and was put on hold. I fully expected his secretary to come back and tell me he was unavailable. Instead, his voice came on the line, hesitant and confused. "Thuy, Tran Anh Thuy, is that really you?" We agreed to meet at a small neutral cafe. When I walked in, he stared at me, his face a mixture of shock and pity. He saw my rough hands, my cheap coat, the exhaustion etched into my face. But when I opened my old briefcase and laid the patent files on the table between us, his expression changed. The pity vanished, replaced by the sharp, focused look of a lawyer who had just stumbled upon the case of a lifetime. He spent 10 minutes reading in silence, his eyes darting back and forth. Finally, he looked up at me, his voice a reverent whisper. Good heavens, Tui. Do you have any idea what you're sitting on? This isn't just a legacy, it's a revolution. Bao's words lit a fire within me. For the first time in 2 decades, I felt a surge of power, of possibility. Our meetings became my new secret life. Instead of rising before dawn to sweep streets, I would meet Bao in the quiet corners of the university library, surrounded by the books that were once my world. We spread out my old research notes, and together we mapped out a strategy. Bao handled the legal framework, while I worked on updating my research, integrating 20 years of technological progress into my original theories. The work was exhilarating. The fog of exhaustion that had clouded my mind for years began to lift, replaced by the sharp, invigorating clarity of intellectual challenge. Bao moved quickly. He contacted Innovatech, a global technology giant, through a discreet back channel. He presented them with a small, anonymous portion of my research, just enough to prove its authenticity and potential. The response was immediate and explosive. They had been pouring hundreds of millions of dollars into R&D, trying to solve the exact data bottleneck my work addressed. They were desperate to know who was behind the research. The negotiations were swift and one-sided. We held all the cards. But I didn't just want money. I wanted to restore my husband's name. I wanted to reclaim my own life. I instructed Bao to propose a unique deal. I wouldn't sell the patents. Instead, I would grant Innovatech an exclusive license under several conditions. First, they would fund and establish a new research facility at the university, my alma mater. This facility would be named the An and Tui Research Institute. Second, I would be appointed its director and a fully tenured professor. Third, a substantial portion of the licensing fee would be structured as a direct philanthropic donation to the university from the new institute in my name and my husband's. Innovatech, seeing the immense value in not only acquiring the technology, but also the story and the mind behind it, agreed to everything. The university, receiving one of the largest donations in its history, was overjoyed. They fast-tracked my professorship and immediately commissioned a portrait to be hung on the wall of distinguished benefactors. The stage was being set. All that was left was to ensure the audience was present for the final act. I picked up the phone and dialed my son. "Min," I said, keeping my voice humble and hesitant, the voice he was used to. "I have a little favor to ask. An old friend gave me tickets to a very exclusive gala at the university. It's for major donors and alumni. I can't go, of course. I wouldn't fit in. But I thought you and Lynn might like to. It could be good for your careers to network with such people." There was a pause. I could hear him whispering to Lynn in the background. I could practically taste her vanity and ambition. An exclusive event. A chance to mingle with the elite. She would never be able to resist. Min came back on the line. "Wow, Mom, that's really thoughtful. Yes, we'd love to go. Thank you." I gave him the details for the dedication ceremony of the new institute, omitting of course what it was being named. After I hung up, I sat in the silence of my small apartment. There was no joy, no triumph. Just the cold, quiet satisfaction of a meticulously laid trap about to spring. The evening of the ceremony. I arrived long before my son and his wife. I stood in the shadows of a marble column, watching the guests arrive. I was no longer the woman in a worn-out coat. I was dressed in a tailored silk pantsuit, my hair styled, my face bearing the subtle touch of a makeup artist Bao had insisted on hiring. I was a stranger in my own skin, waiting to reintroduce myself to the world. Then I saw them. Lynn was resplendent in a gaudy designer dress. Her chin held high as she surveyed the room with a proprietary air. Min trailed behind her, looking tense and out of place, as always. They had no idea they were walking into the public dismantling of their lives. I watched as Lynn, ever the social climber, led her family to the Wall of Honor. I saw her preening, lecturing her daughter on the importance of the people immortalized there. And then I saw the exact moment the world fell out from under her. Her smug expression dissolved, replaced by a ghastly pale shock. She stumbled back a step, one hand flying to her mouth. Min, drawn by her sudden stillness, looked at the wall. His confusion was different from hers. It was slower, deeper, a fundamental rewriting of his entire life's history. He stared at the youthful face of his mother, the professor, and then his eyes scanned the crowd, searching for me, for the street sweeper he thought he knew. At that moment, the university president stepped up to the podium. "Tonight," his voice boomed, "we celebrate a new chapter of innovation." He spoke of a technological breakthrough, a historic partnership, and a monumental donation. Lin and Min were still staring at my portrait, trapped in a bubble of silent horror. They didn't seem to be listening. Then the president's voice cut through their daze. "This incredible leap forward is made possible by the establishment of a new Center for Excellence, the Anne and Toy Research Institute." Min's head snapped toward the stage. His face was a canvas of disbelief. "And now," the president continued, his voice swelling with importance, "it is my profound honor to introduce the brilliant mind behind this revolution, the Institute's new director, who has returned to us after a long absence, Professor Tran An Thuy." A spotlight hit the side of the stage, and I stepped into its beam. A wave of applause rose from the crowd. I walked calmly, my steps even and deliberate, toward the podium. My path took me directly past the front row, where Min and Lin were seated. I did not turn my head, but I felt their eyes on me. I could feel the heat of their shock and shame. When I reached the microphone, I waited for the applause to die down. I looked out at the sea of faces, and then I let my gaze rest on my son and his wife. "Thank you," I began, my voice clear and steady. "My late husband, Anne, and I had a dream. We believed our work could one day connect the world in new ways, but life interrupted that dream." I told them everything. I spoke of a dying promise to a beloved husband. I spoke of a mother's vow to give her son the world. "To honor that vow," I said, my voice turning to ice, "I took on a humble physical job. For 20 years I worked in obscurity to ensure my son had every advantage." The room was silent. "Recently," I continued, looking directly at Lin, "I was told that my hands were too dirty to hold my own grandchild. I was called an old street sweeper, a name meant to cause shame." A wave of murmurs rippled through the audience. People began to turn, to look at Min and Lin, who were shrinking in their seats. "It seems ironic, then," I concluded, my voice ringing with finality, "that these same hands, which swept the streets for 2 decades to fund a comfortable life for others, are the very hands that developed the technology upon which this entire institute is now built." The applause was thunderous. It wasn't just polite clapping, it was a wave of genuine emotion from a crowd that had just witnessed a story of profound sacrifice and ultimate vindication. As the university president shook my hand, his eyes shining with respect, I saw Min and Lin out of the corner of my eye. They were trapped in their seats, a toxic island in a sea of admiration for me. The whispers and stares of the surrounding guests were like arrows, piercing the bubble of their arrogance. They were publicly ruined. Eventually, they managed to push their way through the throng and found me in a private reception room backstage. Min's face was blotchy and streaked with tears. Lin was unnaturally pale, her eyes wide with a terror I had never seen in her before. "Mom," Min began, his voice cracking. "Mom, I am so sorry, I swear I didn't know. If you had just told me." I held up a hand, and he fell silent. My voice was quiet, devoid of the passion from my speech. It was the cold, flat voice of a judge delivering a final verdict. "You didn't know because you never asked. You never cared to look beyond the surface, beyond your own embarrassment. You saw a poor, simple woman, and that was enough for you. You stood by silently while your wife called me filthy, while she threw my love in the trash. Your ignorance was a choice, Min. A comfortable one. I then turned my gaze to Lynn, who flinched as if struck. You built your entire world on a foundation of scorn for me. You enjoyed the life my dirty money provided, all while teaching my granddaughter to be ashamed of me. I let the silence hang in the air for a moment before continuing. That life is now over. The apartment you live in was paid for by me. The lease is in my name. You have 1 month to find somewhere else to live. The car Min drives was a gift from me. The ownership papers are in my name. It will be collected tomorrow morning. Every comfort, every bit of status you used to feel superior was funded by the old street sweeper. Now you will learn to live on your own. Lynn finally broke, a strangled sob escaping her lips. You can't do this. I can, I stated calmly, and I will. However, I will not punish Mai for your cruelty. I am establishing a trust fund in her name that she can access when she is an adult. It will cover her education and her future. You will not have access to any of it, and I will be petitioning the court for regular visitation. My lawyers are confident that given your documented behavior, I will be successful. I looked at my son, a man I no longer recognized, and his wife, a woman I had no desire to ever see again. They were broken, stripped of their assets, their social standing, and their pride. I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no anger, not even pity. I only felt a profound sense of peace. My promise to Anne was finally fulfilled. His legacy was secure, and my life was my own again. Without another word, I turned and walked away, leaving them in the ruins of the life they had built on disrespect. I walked through the halls of the university, not to a cold, empty apartment, but toward my new office, toward the future.